afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest live stream for Chain Reactions. And today we have with us, well, me, I guess that's not with us. I'm Randi Stebbins, and I'm the head of content at AGR, and I'm here to just moderate the discussion. I have two experts in the supply chain with me today, Keith Wright, who is a consultant and also an author on the power of, it was all P's. And I love that because I love a good title that has that in it. What's the title? What's the full title, Keith, of the book?
The Power of Professional Procurement.
I was missing that second P. The Power of Professional Procurement. And we have our own internal AGR expert, Elva, who, true to Iceland, she and I are based in Iceland, goes by her first name. And I will just turn it over to them to let you all know more about both of them. Keith, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Randi. So I've been in the world of procurement and supply chain for at least 30 years. It makes me sound old to say it's more than 30 years, but a long time. So I've typically worked in building materials, so in and around that procurement, I say in supply chain space. 27 years was in leading PLCs in the UK. Now I've been consulting for the last 4.5 years, which is when I also wrote the book. So I typically work with manufacturers, builders, merchants, buying groups here in the UK. So very broad sort of set of customers, but all with that same passion for trying to make it easy for customers to buy in the way that they choose, hence the whole procurement and supply chain piece.
Great, thanks. Elva, what about you?
Yeah, so I've been in the world of supply chain for about just over 15 years. Business supply chain educated. I do have a background in procurement professionally. Spent my almost around last 8 years in inventory optimization consulting, working with wholesalers, retailers, and many countries, many sectors on optimizing the replenishments and also to operationalize the strategic direction. Before that, in my past life, I did work in finance, so I was analyzing fiscal year reports before you could actually get a credit rating by the push of a button. So I'm excited about today's topic, how procurement can really impact the bottom line, the EBITDA, and see how strategic procurement can really make a difference.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, the title of this episode, if you want to call it that, is Supply Chain, the Hidden Link in Financial Success. And we sort of cooked up this theme because we were hearing from our customers and others that making the financial argument between supply chain and, let's say, CFOs or doing S&OP can be a little bit not frustrating, but sometimes it just feels like everybody's speaking a different language or people are looking at entirely different things. And I'm just so lucky to have you both with me today to talk about this issue. So we say that it's the hidden link in financial success in this title, and it's definitely true in conversations that we've been having. But let's make that a little bit more concrete. So Keith, what does that actually look like in business, the ones you're consulting or the ones that you have been a part of?
Yeah, look, I'm a little bit biased on this topic, but I don't think there's many functions that sit right in the heart of the business, whichever business you're in, more so than procurement and supply chain. So you think about anything, even if you're selling services, if you're selling product, everything comes from somewhere. Someone's invented it, someone's created it, and ultimately it needs to get in the hands of your customer, whoever that customer is, whether you're a B2B business, a B2C business, whatever it is. To me, you can fundamentally make or break a business based upon how efficient, how effective, how good and robust your procurement and supply chain is. So to me, it is absolutely everything. You can literally make lots of money or lose lots of money by having the right products, the wrong products, the right pricing, the wrong pricing, a vulnerable supply chain that doesn't serve the needs of your business or your customers. So to me, it is absolutely fundamental to a business to have this, I suppose, healthy beating heart, working effectively in that world of procurement and supply chain.
Great. Elva, I see you nodding along. What do you have to add to that question?
Well, historically, procurement was often under the realms of the chief financial officer, and often, at least in the studies and the research, they were sort of saying there was this momentum to sort of break free and be at the C level to have a CPO next to the CFO, so they would work jointly and with same executive power. And it is because procurement can really make a difference. And just like Keith says, it's the heart of the operations. If you don't have the right goods, it doesn't matter if you marketed the product, if you chose the right product, if you have the right channels. If you can't sell the goods, you're not in business. And if you don't get them fast enough, and this depends on your product, and if you want to be bringing the newest consumer, what do you say, depends on the consumer behavior. If it's a staple, if it's a functional good, you can have this staple supply chain, you can buy it with a 6-month lead time. But if you really are innovative and you're driving the newest trends and you don't know if they're going to spike off or they're going to be slow movers and then something new has sparked their interest, you need to have that flexibility. So if the supply chain strategically is set up in a way to support your business strategy, you're successful. If it's not, it really can break the whole business.
So when we talk about successful in financial terms, what are some measurements of that success that supply chain can link to the overall financial success of the organization? Elva, you want to take this one to start with?
Well, if we look at the operational side first, revenue, sales. If you have the stock when the customer wants it, you maximize the revenue potential. So you can increase the sales. You can then lower cost, the cost of goods sold. And that is basically every cost that is directly related to bringing the goods into a sellable state. So it's unit cost, it's logistics, it's customs, it's transportation, handling. I can go into depends on how you have it. But then also salary. If you're able to have a very lean supply chain, you don't have that rework, that wasteful activities that might be manual labor heavy. And other expenditures, waste, if you have to throw it all away, then that's quite hurtful as well, to have that depreciations that can really hurt the business. And then on the asset side, of course, inventory is an asset. The money you invested in stock sits on your asset side, but then also it reduces your cash, which also is like on the asset side. So which one's more important, to have free cash or to have it invested in stock? And that will just depend on your strategy and the sort of, if you have bulk investments that give you a low unit cost and rationalize having a lot of money invested, or if you really see opportunities in turning stock faster, freeing up cash. Debt side, of course, do you own the money? Did you borrow the money? It's all through the fiscal year report. If you look at it, and you can sort of like, it tells a story to browse through those.
And what about you, Keith? Like, how do you see these key supply chain metrics tying into something very financially based like EBITDA?
Yeah, I mean, Elva's covered most of them. I don't think there's many left after that. I mean, interestingly, I mean, some of the areas that maybe doesn't often get talked about is the impact directly on the customer. So you think about fundamentally stock or inventory, and Elva, quite rightly said that's an investment in the customer proposition. But I mean, obviously, if you don't have the thing the customer wants, then not only are you not going to exercise the sale for that particular thing, but what else? If I take the building materials industry I work in, tradesperson doesn't typically just want that one thing. They maybe want a basket of goods. So what's the impact for the wider basket of goods on a project or the delivery of a wider piece? So you can clearly impact your EBITDA very directly by either having the right things, ranging the right things, having them available, and all of those associated benefits, or not. And even if you have the right range, if you have the right range but no stock, guess what? You're not going to sell it. If you have lots of stock but the wrong range, guess what? It's probably not right for your customer. So it's so fundamentally important, and that's where I think the procurement and supply chain link and clearly finance are so powerful together, because the supply chain team, in fairness, their job's to get the product to the right person at the right time and manage that inventory. But equally, the procurement team needs to be deciding on what the range is. So, again, go back to that sort of parody of right range, wrong stock, or right stock, wrong range, you've got to have those things working together because they can fundamentally tie your EBITDA up in knots. And clearly, from a cash flow perspective, nobody wants too much stock, nobody wants too little stock, nobody wants stock that's not working hard enough for you. You know, you can have stock that's really just not impacting and turning over effectively enough. It's just never ending, is it? This sort of focus on driving the right behavior and driving the right efficiency and benefit for your business.
You know, Keith, your mentioning of the customer actually sparked something in me, that because AJR is a SaaS company, we talk about ARR, or annual recurring revenue, you know, which is how much revenue you can expect to get from your customer, basically. Now, SaaS is subscription based, so I can see that it's different. But it struck me when you were talking about customers, especially something like building materials, which I would guess is a pretty competitive field. You know, it costs you something to get that customer. And if they leave you too, you're not going to have any sort of recurring revenue that you can get from that. Is that something that supply chains take into, or financial in the supply chain take into account too, for whatever it's named by?
Yeah, I mean, you would always be typically looking at, I suppose, the recency and frequency of how customers are shopping and understanding the reason why. I mean, interestingly, without spending too much time just on building materials, but the builders merchants are typically the supply chain for that tradesperson. So yeah, if you're based upon reputation, or sorry, your reputation is based upon reliability of supply, if you get let down by your supply chain, then you're the one that's going to look bad either in front of your customer, or if you're on site, you imagine you're building and your product doesn't turn up, well, what do? You're kind of standing around literally waiting for things to arrive on site. So there's a lot of hidden cost financially, but also from a reputational perspective when you're dealing with in that case, a B2B kind of business. So yeah, I guess at any instance, you're looking at when has a customer last bought, what have they bought, what haven't they bought, what do you expect them to be doing in the future, how busy are they, what's the share of wallet that you're getting potentially from that customer, are you getting half of it, 10%, etc. So yeah, I think there's some real interesting dynamics when it comes to the customer that I don't always think procurement supply chain teams have typically thought about the person that's at the end of that sort of transaction and that function. You know, what are you actually doing? You're not just moving stuff around because it's a hobby. You're doing it for a specific customer need. And that customer need, that's so important, I think, as a takeout for procurement supply chain experts or anyone in that function to think about who you're actually serving at the end of that work.
Yeah, and Elva, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not the supply chain. Like, that's something we refer to as service level in the supply chain industry. You know, how often are you meeting the needs of the customer? Is there a way that we can recommend our supply chain professionals that are watching with us today, or will view this later, how to explain the importance of service level to their finance team so that maybe they can understand better why it's important, or make
Why
a
even
clear connection?
because I think
Yeah. Why you even measure it? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I mean it's a super important metric, but it's hard to measure in a way. So if you have B2B, then you probably have customer orders, so there's at least something to measure against. If you're in retail, then it's often just, did you have it in stock, yes or no? Because there might have been demand, it's likely to have been in demand. But then if you have projects and you have deadlines, then it's like a very hard metric because you were supposed to deliver on a certain day. And if you're missing a component and you can't put it together, that's just such a sad story. But it can't be for wholesale. It can't be, against one order. It can be against line level, because an order can have multiple lines, and you might have been able to deliver 97% of it, but then one line was missing. So if it's a whole order and you'll just say I didn't deliver everything, that's a bit more rough on the measure. But it sort of says maybe that if you reach a service level of 93% and you have an annual turnover, well, then what is your potential to increase in revenue if you would reach 95%, 96%? And just a marginal increase of revenue just by 1 or 2% can be huge. It can be, millions in revenue, depending on the currency, of course. But it's a size that matters to finance. And they are definitely interested in maximizing sales. But then is it being measured? Do you know where you stand? Do you know why you can't reach it better than you are today? And that's something that procurement can help with, to make sure that everybody's talking together, that lead times from suppliers and promises we make to our customers, that it can be mapped, that we have the right supply chain structure for whatever promise we have to our customers. And sometimes, it's not humanly possible to just have everything all the time, because there's just too much investment. And you say, well, it's not worth that kind of money. But at least, logistics will have issues. There will be strikes at harbors. There will be, disruptions here and there. But then at least starting to measure it and make sure that there's nothing within the human reach that is preventing you to maximize your revenue, then you're on the right track. And procurement and finance should definitely work hard together, and cross-functionally also have a good discussion with sales about what is our service promise, what are we promising, and can we deliver without raising havoc.
Yeah, and so
I
Keith,
just
I
build
wonder
on
if you
that.
could
Can I just
please do.
build
Please
on
do.
Elva's point? Sorry, just it's just in my head. So one thing I was always taught when I was growing up in business was no one likes shocks and surprises. So I think what's interesting in Elva's point is stuff happens, right? Lots and lots has happened. Probably most of us experience things in the last 5 years that most would in a 40-year career. So I think the important thing is, though, when those things happen, yes, of course, you have a service level agreement that can manage expectations, but how do you manage the supply chain and, really importantly, the communication to whichever customer is in that link when those things happen? So, it's not a question of, I'm just hoping for the best and we'll just get by and give false promises, and it just creates more and more pressure. Because link it back to EBITDA, if there's a big black hole somewhere, at least if I might not be happy if I get that phone call to say I have a problem, but at least I can now work on a plan B. And plan B might be I extend lead time to customers. It might be I have to bring something else in, but at least you can manage it. The worst thing that you can do is hide behind the issue and not communicate it and just leave customers in the dark. That's just not okay. It's not how to win friends and influence people. So I just wanted to build that point on Elva, because I think it's really important that we accept that life isn't going to be easy every day. That's just not how the world works right now, right?
And that relationship to the customer is so important. To reach out and say, hey, you ordered this, we won't be able to deliver. You could alternatively have something else, or perhaps accept a longer lead time. And often that will be the case then also with whoever you're competing against. But sometimes world issues happen to everyone, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's really about having also risk mitigated your supply chain. If you have an open supply market and you can buy commodities from different parts of the world with different logistic lanes, then you might want to have in your sourcing strategy, these are my backup suppliers for the key components. And if you have a standardized selection, and to say at least that, in case of fires, because they will come at some point, how quickly can we deal with that?
Oh,
But then it's always like how much time to invest in those efforts versus the value they bring. Is in business. It just, want to keeps it exciting, I guess.
yeah, that actually came up for me while you two were talking. Like, we have this one supply chain metric, service level, how it's usually by percent. And then we have maybe finance looking at it and saying, yeah, but your like stock is costing so much for us to hold or house, or, all of these plans you have are costing money. How can we help our supply chain people counter argue, or at least start moving the finance people around to the point of view that sometimes the costs work it, sometimes not? What other metrics can we look at? Keith, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to come back to probably the pain point of the customer and almost what's their expectation of service, because not everything needs to be right now. Just because you can go on your phone and, I don't know, order a pizza and it can be here in 10 minutes doesn't mean that everything in life needs to be that instantaneous. So I think there's an element of, it's interesting when I look across some of the supply chain that I work in, is I don't think the industry per se is short of stock. I think typically got lots of stock. The question is, where is it at any point in time? And ultimately, what's the distance between where it is at that point and where it needs to be to get it to the customer? And it doesn't always need to be physically stocked in a store or a branch. It could be, clearly it could be in a warehouse. It could be with a manufacturer that drop ships it to the customer. Yeah, there's lots of ways that you can manage, I think, the service to the customer. So it's maybe the wrong question for finance of why have you got too much stock? I think the right question is, where is the service proposition you're building to ultimately fulfill the needs of your customers in the most efficient, reliable way? That's the question I think I would ask. And it might be I've got too much of something, not enough of others, and I need nothing of something else because I can completely supply the market in a different way.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's a question that finance would ask? And if not, would even be open to seeing it from that point of view? Because we are talking a little bit two different worlds, and finance is looking at their financial spreadsheets, ERPs, whatever parts, and supply chain is looking at those. How do we bridge the gap between those two different worlds?
Do you want me to take that one again, or Elva, do you want to dive in?
I'm just following up on what you were saying.
In my experience, I think there's quite close collaboration between finance and procurement. They have to work together. And often they'll have a service part towards each other. So finance will, surface, this is our turnover ratio. Do you think we could turn it faster? Do you think we're at an optimal place? I can see it's increasing maybe. And then they also should have the clarity on if that's in line with the revenue increasing or not. Hopefully they'll have information about stock that is not giving value, that is just sitting there and taking up space. And hopefully procurement or inventory, often it will be the warehouse workers, but it has to be also in line with, it's a cross-functional role. You have to talk to sales, you have to talk to marketing and procurement to say, should we scrap it? Or do we want to promote it with something else? Do we want to contact some customers and ask them if it's still something they would like to buy? You can't have, procurement will never succeed in isolation. And I think finance will always benefit from, having those collaborative goal settings on what the stock investment, a healthy stock investment should look like. But I'm interested, Keith, because when you approach customers or a consulting project, you said that the financial analyst is your best friend. So what are you after?
I think, I suppose, I mean, interesting on here, right? There's an element here of, I don't know if it's an English phrase, but marking your own homework. So I think you mentioned collaboration, having a healthy set of professionals that can challenge each other respectfully to get the right result. So to me, my go-to in one of the clients that I'm working with, my go-to is absolutely the finance analyst, because I trust the data. So the one thing, I can have an opinion, I can talk to people and get subjective views or objective views, but the data is the data. So what I tend to do is say, here's a set of questions, or here's some things I'm thinking about. Can you present this in a consistent manner that's fair, that's transparent, that I can then go and do some work on fundamentally? And equally then, not that you want to analyze everything, although I probably would because I like numbers, but if you're going to do something, what is it you're trying to achieve? What's your expectation, and how are you doing on that journey? Which is, again, I go back to the finance piece and say, here's what I think I'm trying to do, or here's what the team's trying to deliver. Can we signpost how we're delivering against that? Because it's this piece of, we often talk about control groups in some of the work that I do. It's almost trying to say, what would have happened had I done nothing versus what is happening because I've done this set of things. And it's difficult, but if you say, I don't know, this thing's would have given me 5%, this has actually given me 10%, or whatever the relative kind of numbers are. So, because something would have happened regardless of whether you did something or not. It's back to that factor. So trying to get, because then that's too analytical for my my procurement brain, I go and talk to someone that does it for a living and say, can you work out a way that enables us to analyze this in a fair, consistent manner? So I'm not marking my homework. They're actually marking my homework and giving a balanced view as to whether it's been successful or not. And then you can deal with whatever those facts and figures are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think this points to an interesting discussion we had in one of these live streams earlier about the importance of having unified data and having it accessible and available to work with. And I thought that was interesting, Keith, what you said earlier, like the worst thing you can do is like hide behind the black hole and not talk to the customer. But I think perhaps it's even worse if you can't even out the issues that are happening because you just don't have the overview or the data overview that you may need to have. And Keith, I think you put forth an interesting idea that like maybe you as a procurement or in the supply chain warehouse can really lean on the financial side's overview that they have of things to help you. I like this idea of like grading your own homework, to help you structure that data. And maybe you're not a data person, maybe that's not what you love, but I wonder what your thoughts are about the importance of having data flowing in order to support those conversations and support these sort of metrics, be they financial or supply chain, that we've brought up in this time together.
I do think data is so pivotal. I mean, we're probably blessed with so much that it can be too helpful. You can sort of not move for it if you're not careful and analyze and analyze and analyze. But at some point, you've got to say broadly, what's the direction of travel that this information's telling me? And it's interesting. I can't remember the actual specific context, but I was in a board meeting recently and I said, it's great news, this has happened, margins up or something was working positively. And that was my interpretation of the data. And I got challenged in a respectful way to say, actually, I think it's because of this and these things have happened. And because of this, it's a completely different interpretation of the same data. So I was like, actually, now I don't know, because that's a really interesting view. So I suppose that's the thing with data. We can all interpret the view of it. Yeah, the numbers are the numbers, right? But what's the actual story it's telling you? And there is a danger. I could have gone running off in this direction, if you can see me, on the left direction, and actually the business was going in the other direction, and we would have just ended up miles apart. So I think one version of the truth, but importantly, understanding the context and being able to maybe debate some of those bigger topics around what is the information and data telling us, and what can we glean from it so that we can actually do something meaningful on the other side.
That's interesting. Elva, did you want to follow up on that?
No, I think it really shows how, you can have individual KPIs. And if you're just looking at, whether it's EBITDA or another KPI, like you can always you have to have that kind of full spectrum of, what's going on in the business. Because like it will have so many different operations, probably different commodity groups, different people working on different things. You could have had a new commodity come in with a higher margin. You might have turned a improvement initiative where you're just going to like limit the handling so there's less workload in the operation side. So there are different reasons for cost of goods perhaps to go down, or different reasons for sales to go up. Hopefully when you increase revenue, the costs don't follow. Like that would always be the goal, to like get that marginal impact or like higher margins captured, but they have to pay for the rest of the business. And you want to be able to enter new markets and grow your product and be innovative. And you have to have some leeway to be able to do that. So I think that's so good that you have different knowledge at the table and respectfully challenging each other on, the reasons why and where it comes from. So I think like if you measure where you are and then start initiatives to improve, it's really important that you know which initiatives are going on and which one is successful and which one is perhaps just additional headcount. Because business, I mean, you have to make decisions, and then time will go by, and then you like get new data, and then you like might have to adjust your decisions and fine tune.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying, Keith, about the difference between data itself and the numbers, however you visualize them, the context, and what's behind the data, right? Because I think often data in abstract is just treated as almost a godlike figure. But like everything else, it is so open to our interpretation and the stories we tell ourselves about it. Otherwise, it has no meaning whatsoever, actually. We're the ones that make meaning out of it. So I really, really find that interesting. And to sort of spin off your comment that like you were looking at the same data, one of you had one story about what was driving it, one of you had another story about what was driving it. How did you, or maybe you didn't resolve, but how would you suggest like looking into which one of those stories may actually be the case, or if they're both the case simultaneously? Like, I think it's a really interesting problem to solve. You know, maybe supply chain is saying, no, this is driving it. Maybe finance is saying, no, this is driving it. Sales is saying, this is driving it. How do you, when you're in that moment and you're doing that work, how do you try to resolve these discussions?
I mean, this might make you laugh, but what we agreed was we'd do some more analysis. But the important thing in this instance, I mean, it was quite a specific point where this particular business uses weighted average stock valuation. So we're looking about selling price inflation. So my argument was selling prices had gone up because we'd done something in the market, and actually the counter argument was no, margin's gone up because the actual weighted cost has just come down over time because you're stockholding. Actually, both things could be true. It could be a bit of one and one of the other. So obviously at some point your stock is going to be valued at the price you would now pay in the forward market. So yeah, it's a fairly easy one to fix. We just need to make sure we're reporting in an open way and not just because we all hear these sorts of throwaway comments. Oh, it's all good because of this, or it's all bad because of this. So actually, let's understand that particular detail and see whether we have or haven't kidded ourselves into something that we should have got anyway, and actually what we thought was happening wasn't actually happening. But yeah, it was an interesting topic. It's an interesting debate. But it does make me wonder though, without going on, is how many times may that view be around the table, but somebody isn't bold enough to challenge? I don't know how you fix that, but you don't want to challenge every single comment, but sometimes I bet people are sat there thinking, I just don't believe that, and aren't maybe brave enough to give a counter argument, again, in a respectful, sort of balanced way, but just to, not every version of the truth is correct based upon our own assumptions or ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the end, we're human beings and we bring our own experiences and biases to the table to any discussion, on any topic. It's fascinating because we're talking about finance and data and stuff, but we've like circled back around to the very human side of things multiple times, with the customer focus, with this idea of like outing different opinions that may help everybody understand things differently, this idea of communication. And Elva, you said, and I think actually both of you said something similar about how supply chain, procurement, inventory is the heart of an organization. Or Elva, I think you said like they could be the connector between these different parts. So Elva, I wonder if you would flesh that out for me a little bit more about how you see supply chain being the center, the connector between things like finance, sales, all these other moving pieces of a corporation or a company.
Well, it's within the operational part it's the physical flow of goods. So I mean, you have to receive good, you have to, you might store it, you might also cross-dock it straight to the channels, you might have your own store outlets, you might have, omnichannel or, business unit, but it's always a product that, or usually you might have a service supply chain too, but let's say it's a product and it has to be, it comes into the house, it's handled, it's received, and then a customer either already ordered it and it's serviced, or it waits to be served or put into manufacturing, more value adding to assembly. So there's some value addition that happens within the company. You might put goods together and, say this is the value offering because I did something more valuable than other competitors could do. So it has to be a collaboration about, before you decide what to buy, you're probably going to look at the customer market and say, is there a market for this? Would they buy it from me? Why? Why am I different? Do I have a better price? Do I have, better product offering or service? And whatever differentiation is, that's your angle. And then you say, okay, so how should I buy it? Should I be agile? Should I be flexible? Should I source it locally? Should I buy it? Should I do the design and outsource the manufacturing? Should I offshore? Should I, whatever the strategy is. So without that operational part of getting the goods in, ordering them, receiving them, transporting them, there is no product sales, I guess. You can't build the house without, the parts that go into the house. But procurement, I mean, sometimes you have it very sort of isolated. So procurement will handle optimizing the logistics. They know the limitation of the warehouse space. They know the cost. They know the holding cost. If they buy container 20 foot, 40 foot, how do they disperse that down to each unit? Is it still profitable? And what is the margin? But then if it's new products, they really need to have feedback from the product manager or the sales that, what's the direction? How do we expect it to sort of launch? And is it risky? Do we believe that we can sell it if we buy too much somehow? So they need to have that input. And also, when should they buy it for in season? When do they expect the season to go off? So there's like a lot of things you can't just look at a unit price, a supply or logistic lanes, and how much is on a pallet, and you can't really make a good decision without input.
Mm.
And you might also be investing in new markets, and then the board, the owners of the company, the finance department might say, actually, we need to free up cash. So this year we're gonna minimize our investment in inventory because we're investing in this new building or this new opportunity or this new line of goods. And to do that, we need to be strategic about our cash. And we have an opportunity to turn stock faster. And then we could analyze, if we turn it faster, does that mean the logistic cost will eat up our margin? If we source it from a distributor instead of a manufacturer and the unit cost goes up a bit, is that acceptable? So you need to know that your holding cost is, whatever it is. It could be 20%, it could be up to 30, could be down to 14. I mean, whatever it is, and then look at the value and look at the cash to cash cycle, meaning from the day you pay your supplier or your logistics until the day you receive money from your customers. Is that a period of 20 days or is it 2 years? And that will really be different for different supply chains. But that is a metric that tells you, what's your opportunity? What if I negotiate 90-day payment terms with my suppliers? And then at the point of turning stock faster, could I even have sold it before I pay my suppliers? Like, is that possible? Can I free up cash in that way? So you could be strategic about direction, about new markets to enter. Maybe you want to acquire a different company that will give you core competence in an area you've been lacking. Procurement is your really strategic ally to make or break the organization, such as Keith has mentioned before.
And Keith, in your experience because you've worked with many organizations, do you find that there is a high level of communication, making strategy together across these different teams? Or where do you see like sticking points that may come up over and over again?
I think it's a good question. I'm not sure it's necessarily one size fits everybody. I think there's nuances across businesses. I mean, fundamentally, depends who's setting the strategy, of course, but then it's the teams that need to collaborate. So, often you might see a silo. So we've spoke today around, well, what do finance think of this, and what do supply chain think of that, and what's procurement's view? And ultimately, we're all here to make money. So what's the return on stock? What's the EBITDA? What's the cash flow? There's some fundamental business objectives that ultimately we're here to do the same thing. And that means I come back to the easier you make it for customers to buy from your business and they choose you more often than others. Well, as long as you've got all the other bits right, you should make more money. So you have to me, you have to come at it from, yes, it's okay to debate, it's okay to have different views, that's really healthy. But fundamentally, what's the reason you're all here to exist? Yeah, it's because a customer has chosen to pay your organization. That's why we all have jobs. So, yeah, I think to me, it has to come from a place of collaboration, openness, trust, working together in that positive way. It doesn't always happen. I think when you hear, it's almost like the enemy's not in the room. Not to be too controversial in terms of the enemy's a competitor. I don't mean like that, but often you see some infighting. You think, well, we're the same team. It's the same colours above the door. It's the same name on the shirt or something. So be passionate, but work together in a way that you know is ultimately there for serving the needs of your customers. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
No, I just like, as a communicator, just love how like it's really just all comes down to the, humans, like the customer, the people, like who are you trying to serve? And I'm all for getting paid. So we're almost done. I just have one question that maybe I know I'm a little bit jumping or surprising you with this question, but if you can think of one like procurement or supply chain change that made a surprising impact, like, as far as financial goes. Maybe I'm not explaining this. Like, I'm really thinking of like, what is something that maybe was a decision in the supply chain that had a surprising impact for the non-supply chain people as far as financials or other things?
Good question.
That makes sense? Yeah. I like your questions. I love it when people say that.
Well, I remember we had in the manufacturing world I lived in some years ago, we had like most of the work we manufacture was to projects, so you couldn't really standardize. But some of the it was like scales we produced that were standard. A few types of them, and it was a very fragile production process. And we were like benchmarking if we should outsource or if we should in-house. And the in-house team like really went on fire to optimize their own manufacturing process, just to make sure that whatever offer we were getting was like, we could sort of benchmark it to say, what is the best we can do, and let's make sure we choose an outsourcing partner that can do it better or at the same quality. And we reduced our lead time from like a variation of 7 to 9 weeks to I think 3 weeks standard. And because we were so fast from customer ordering to delivery, like sales went up, cost went down, and we decided to not outsource at all because it was fabulous. We took less space in the manufacturing area. We got that Kanban stocking system we had adopted in other parts of the floor, but so that was like a positive multiple side effects from just saying, is it the best price we could be getting? Is it the best quality? Is it the best, service lead time?
That's a great example, especially because I think people wouldn't think necessarily of a manufacturing team being so central to the entire process and getting that down. Yeah, that's really awesome. What about you, Keith?
Well, thank you for giving me a bit of time to think about it, Elva. Mine's a little bit broader, which is there's something in here around. Firstly, you can't do everything, right? It's impossible to do everything, and you shouldn't even try and do everything. And one of the things I try to do when I go into any sort of business is understand the things that materially matter to either that business or its customers. So it's the classic Pareto rule. So 80% of the value from 20% of the effort. And it's amazing when you start, again, not being overly challenging, but say, well, why are we doing that? Why are we focused on these things? What about these things over here? And often you find businesses that probably sell hundreds of thousands of products, but actually the ones that make the biggest difference, it generally is about 1,000 or 2,000. And you sort of narrow it down and say, where do you really, really, really focus your efforts? And it's not saying you forget about the 20 that you're not getting to or the 80 you're not getting to, but it's saying it doesn't really matter. In the grand scheme of it, let's not we talked about data and analytics. It doesn't really matter how much time you spend on those things. They're quite immaterial, but really, really, really focus on these things. And you can always pick it. It's a report that someone spends hours every week sending out and nobody reads it, but no one's brave enough to say, "Oi, Dave, can you stop sending that report? Because it's boring. It doesn't do anything." So I think sometimes there's some little things in here that we really can, again, challenge to be super, super focused. I'll have a load of stuff still, but there is always things that people are doing that don't move the needle. And if we're just sharper and more focused on the things that do, then that can have such an impact on a business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just finished writing a blog about the ABC analysis, which is the Pareto principle in effect, in inventory management, and how if you get that down, you'll know, which 80% and which are the 20% and which you should be paying attention to and which you can you can sort of just let coast along on their own. So yeah, that's very interesting and also just top of my mind. Well, I just want to wrap it up and say thank you so much to both of you. Are there any last words that you want to throw in that you think we haven't covered, or things that came up while we were talking? And I've been monitoring our
I don't think
chat.
so.
We got some nice positive feedback, but no questions. So I am going to close this down for today and just give a shout out that the next episode will be in December, and our AGR CEO, along with another one, will be taking a look at the supply chain, look back at 2025 and look ahead at 2026. So I hope that you can all join us for that as well. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.